I seem to have passed out fairly early when I got back um, from the compost run. I think it was less the actual distance and more just the fact that I didn't stop. Um, like I was just like zoomy walkie for a good 3 straight hours, and my feet were sore, and I just ended up catching up on a little bit of sleep. Um, I did end up getting a fair amount of sleep, so that is good. I spent the morning uh, a little bit sarcastically reacting to the primaries last night. I'm going to read a couple of comments, but it's about 6:30 right now, and I'm going to be getting to archiving for the afternoon. Um, the weather's going to be really bad tomorrow night, so I'm double guessing the idea of heading to that show. The other thing is that they're not going to have a keyboard player. I'm going to want to hear what they sound like without a keyboard player before I make any decisions on checking it out. This is another experiential show. I'm not a big fan or anything. The record sounds quite good though. The thing is that a lot of what's good about it is the production. So let's see if I can find some live sets and go from there. I mean, if it turns out to be like just another kind of aimless noise band, I'm gonna want to pull out of it. The draw is that it's superior songwriting. We'll see where it goes from there. I didn't see the results from Arizona start coming in, but let me guess. Hillary started with 70% initial results, and it's been coming down all night, right? What is that? It's 6:30 in the morning now, and it's about it's been coming down all night. It's a little under 58. That's what you expect it to stabilize around 56 or 57, probably, right? We'll see where it comes up, but that's the same pattern that you saw in Ohio. And might be the same pattern that you see in a few other places. And it's a very suspicious pattern. The time of day or the order in which the ballots are cast should not have any effect on the outcome. But there's not enough caucus states. All evidence suggests that they're just going to respond to any kind of pushback by more stuffing and making it harder to vote and everything else, right? So you have to understand that this was over before it started. There was never a contested primary. It's just all drama. And all you can do in response is refuse to vote for her and hope a third party appears with enough of a movement behind it to make a difference. And I got a couple of links here explaining that it's the same patterns that you're seeing in all these other states. Long lineups. They have less ballots open, or sorry, less precincts open. They're running out of ballots. It's still the same nonsense. That's obviously designed to make it harder for people to vote on voting day, and not be able to overpower the significant lead that was built up in pre-polling or pre-voting. That's how you steal an election, boys and girls. Okay, so this is my takeaway from the night with the results say and present as a path moving forwards. So I claimed Bernie needed to be aiming for a 50-plus haul tonight, which would have been a 70% floor overall. He did get close to 80% in both Utah and Idaho, so he beat it there. But Arizona carried on the same pattern where Clinton's lead in initial results was far too big to overcome with real votes. It's come down a lot over the night, as it did in other places. So I will reiterate, I don't think Clinton or the party is doing this for delegates. If you split a 45-55 result, it's not much of a delegate difference. although it does add up over 30 states if it consistently leans in the same direction, so much as I think it's about TV coverage. This is an important point, and it's that Hillary Clinton is probably the country's last serious conventional media candidate. She's the last TV-era candidate. Her base is not determined by skin color or language or anything of the sort, so much as determined by age. She's the old people candidate. Okay, she's the previous generation's last stand. So she's playing to the boomer and early Xer tendency to watch the results on TV and then go to bed. That's the real reason she's giving herself these insurmountable leads with supposed early voters, so that her base can go to bed seeing her head by 20 to 30 points and conclude she's winning comfortably. That's what it's all about. Okay. My math had him win Washington 60 to 40 and pointed out a 70 to 30 win would give him some breathing room. But after underperforming in Arizona, he needs to be looking at something like the 75 or 80% he just got in Idaho and Utah in order to just stay on path. So he has to win Washington by a huge margin, and it may be his last, it will almost certainly be his last serious stand. So what's the next round going to be like then? I haven't really poked the models in the eyes yet. Okay, I refuse to accept the argument that Sanders had a better chance in Ohio than he did in Illinois due to racial breakdowns, and I suggested that Michigan would be a split, which was very different, but I've otherwise largely arrived at the same conclusions via different metrics. And you might expect that, really, as I'm arguing the race is a proxy variable rather than a predictive one. As such, you'd expect it should work out more often than not, even if it's logically incoherent to suggest that a racial breakdown is a causal factor. Meaning that, what I'm saying is that the models might get it right most of the time, but it's basically by accident. Alaska and Hawaii are giving me an opportunity to push back a little, although I need to provide the caveat that I have not seen any polling and reserve the right to modify my analysis as a consequence of direct data appearing. So the models will tell you that there aren't any black people in Hawaii or Alaska, so Bernie should win big. It's a lack of people predisposed to voting for Clinton due to the color of their skin. I do take a different view. So rather, let's look at votes so far for places outside of the contiguous 48. In American Samoa, Clinton had 68%, and in the Northern Marianas, Clinton had 54%. You might want to note, though, that Sanders isn't making up the difference, right? So Clinton got 68 and Sanders got 26 in American Samoa, and Clinton got 54 and Sanders got 34 in the Northern Marianas. So, you're still looking at like 10% that's voting otherwise in these distant, far-flung places. And they weren't a really long time ago either, right? So you're looking at, write-in ballots, local politics, all those sorts of things, right? And it is a small sample, and direct polling will render it obsolete if any appears, but I do think it's a better measure in at least Hawaii, maybe less so in Alaska. We should also not forget that Sanders did very well in the Democrats abroad, taking in 69, but you also note that the 69-31 split it adds right up to 100, right? Which is just more evidence that it's not the same thing as a state or territorial primary. Sanders has consistently outperformed Clinton with people that are, one, very liberal, and two, that are very educated. If you're going to vote in the Democratic primary from Singapore or something, chances are that you're both. Okay, so you can understand that in terms of ideology and education. That's why Sanders won the abroad vote. Okay, so nor are we dealing with indigenous inhabitants, so it's not really useful in looking at the Hawaii or the Alaska. The takeaway, though, from what I'm saying is that it's not that I should automatically favor Clinton, it's that I can't automatically favor Sanders in either of these states. Although note that they are caucuses, and what I say about caucuses. I need direct polling. I don't think anything that you're going to pull out of the contiguous 48 is useful in Alaska or Hawaii. Alright? But I do think Clinton's tendency to do better in distant territories, and Hawaii is a distant territory, gives her an advantage in Hawaii, even if it's not a particularly large one, just because there's not any data. Okay? That logic may be less applicable to Alaska, but I think it's at least as useful as racial profiling. So what I'm saying is that Clinton should probably be favored in Hawaii based on the idea that she does better in distant territories and that there's really no useful information about Alaska at all. What about Washington? Well, I need to learn from past experiences, right? It sure looks like she cheated in Arizona, and it sure looks like she cheated in Ohio, and you ended up with inflated wins that didn't really match the numbers. It looks like she cheated in Massachusetts and Illinois and managed to win in situations where she probably actually lost. And it looks like she cheated in Michigan and lost anyways. So why wouldn't I expect her to cheat in Washington? It's an open primary. It's the same as Michigan and Illinois. So he ought to blow her away there. You're looking at an extremely liberal state. The states around it have voted overwhelmingly for Sanders, and it's an open primary, so you can bring independents in. So not only is it a state where you can bring independents in, it's a state where one would expect that Democrats would at least split, right? So 70% should be a low bar. But based on what we've seen her do, what that just means is that she'll stuff 10 times as many ballots and make it that much harder for people to vote. Okay? You may be expecting me to call Washington for Sanders by a big margin. I'm not going to. My actual prediction for Washington is that if there's any remaining doubt about whether this process is rigged or not, it will be over by the time Washington is tabulated. Washington will just make it that much more obvious. I'm not going to put numbers down. If Clinton manages to win Washington, it'll just be like blatant, right? But I think that even if it's like close, right? Like if Sanders only wins by 55, that will be enough to basically, knock him out, right? If he only gets 55% in Washington, he can go home, kind of thing. He's not going to because he wants everybody to vote, and I agree with him, but it's over, right? So I'm not going to put those numbers down. Whether it's that Clinton barely wins or Sanders is kept to 55 when he should really probably expect something more like 75. It's hard to say exactly how they'll do it. It will depend on turnout, right? So even if she rigs it like massively, if there's huge turnout, he could still manage to barely win. But it doesn't matter. He has to win by a huge amount, and he probably will if you discard the cheating, but he won't actually, because they'll make sure he doesn't. That's about all I'll say about that. We'll wait to see if some polls come out. What I will say is this. I think there's a reason you didn't see any polls in Arizona. And the reason that you didn't see any polls in Arizona may also prevent any polls from Washington from appearing. If you want to see any, about the only person that's going to publish any polls for Washington is the Sanders campaign. But yeah, maybe I should do that. I'm going to put an open request for polling in Washington. If you have the ability to poll people in Washington, please do so. So they're talking about peak oil, and Corbett is actually taking the outrageous position that there's no peak oil. They can create as much as they want, which is why they're investing billions, if not trillions, into Canadian oil sands that are barely able to produce a return, and they're drilling into the ground to try to shake free the last little bits and drops that they can find. But there's no possibility that we might run out. It's just all just a big scam. It is the case that nobody involved with the peak oil theory saw the technology of shale coming, and the time frames consequently need to be modified to account for different types of technology. but we're talking about, on the order of decades at the most. The fact that oil is a non-renewable energy source is not up for question, um, unless you um, are willing to hop onto the abiotic oil theory that certain Soviet researchers were convinced of, and that the Russian government doesn't even take seriously anymore. Sure. On one hand, oil is just hydrocarbons, right? You'd think you could create something like it. Um, Certainly something like gas. It's a little easier said than done, though, right? So, but that said, it's sort of similar to the Luddite fallacy, right? Or the Luddite fallacy. Um, that's essentially his argument. Um, or another way to look at it is um, the Malthusian fallacy. Um, and what we're seeing is that technology keeps saving our asses. Um, we keep running into these situations, right? We're supposed to be overpopulated and not be able to feed ourselves, but then we come up with refrigeration, oil-based pesticides, and they let us produce just ridiculous amounts of food, right? Um, so we're able to adjust to this, incredible population curve by producing enough to meet it. But the truth is, it's really just bullshit luck. Um, Eventually, we're going to hit a carrying capacity, and our numbers are going to have to fall. Um, Pointing to the fact that we've been pretty good about technology so far doesn't change the inevitability of the carrying capacity. Pointing to the fact that we've been able to create new jobs doesn't, as technology has developed, doesn't eliminate the eventual necessity that technology will fuck us over, or will fuck capitalism over anyways. I think that the end result will be good. After we might have to go through a bit of a down period, but the end result of building our society around automation, that's a positive. Even if we have to deal with the collapse of the system that we're in now in order to adjust to that. And likewise, the fact that oil is non-renewable is something that we will eventually need to deal with. We might find, giant reserves in the Antarctic or something. And the climate change that our use of fossil fuels is producing may even help us access those reserves. Okay, but eventually, whether it's next week or next century, we will run out of oil. It's just a question of when, not a question of if, right? So this is the kind of thing that you know he I said when I started this he was going to piss me off, and that's the kind of thing that's just like, why would you say that? How can you be that? Like you seem to be fairly well read about so many things. How could you be so ignorant about things that you expect most people have a decent understanding of? Um, oil is not renewable. That's not a conspiracy. You'll have to deal with that at some point, whether you like it or not. This is just a short response to the weapons of mass destruction that were supposedly found in Iraq near the end of 2014. and were claimed to be under the control of ISIS. Oops. No, it's not an oops. There were never weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq. That's the lie. Okay, you don't need to go to explain why they would pretend that they didn't find them. They didn't find them. But they want to tell you that they found them in order to uphold the narrative of history that was presented by the media. If you were alive during the period, it may frighten you to think of the way that the history books will be written, and in fact, are already being written. I read an article a little while back about this, and if you can find a history textbook designed for high school students, I would do so. I would bet that you will be appalled at its contents. It will, like I say, I've read a few articles, and the history books for high school students that they've already put out there are completely whitewashing the entire situation. Demonizing all of the opposition to the war, and upholding the narrative that George Bush II was absolutely correct to take us into Iraq. That's what kids learn in high school nowadays. And so, in the long run, what the narrative of history will state is that we went to Iraq to find weapons of mass destruction, and we found them. Why else would we go, other than to find what we were looking for? And we found what we were looking for, too. And the war was therefore justified, on the basis it was presented to us as. Of course, it serves current purposes to give those weapons to the bad guys that we're funding. But, just as a secondary part of this, he suggests that people are modifying their perspectives about the war. They say that there's a higher percentage of people that were opposed to the war today than there were 10 years ago. And we're changing our minds. And then he tries to suggest it's controlled or something. I think that there's a much less complex explanation. And it's simply that, and again, if you were alive at the time to remember this, it's that older people were more in favor of the war, and younger people were more opposed to it. So when you ask a question like that 10 years later, you have a lot of dead people that aren't going to answer your polling, and you have a lot of younger people that are old enough to answer your polling now. So if you were 12 during the invasion and you opposed it, you can't answer that question over the phone, but you can answer it when you're 22. And likewise, if you were 60 at the time and died at the age of 67 of cancer, you wouldn't be around to answer that question 10 years later. I'm not saying that there's been no reevaluation. It's well understood that everybody went to Woodstock, right? But there's a much simpler explanation to explain the shape of the shifting data. And it's just that old people die, because everything dies. I forgot to point out that today's Hillary Said is a video of her hitting on video games, where she compares video games to lead poisoning in terms of their effect on the minds of children. That's right. That's something that Hillary actually said. Really? It's noon, which is a little bit later than I wanted it to be, and I'm just about there. I decided to go ahead and edit yesterday's vlog, just because I did do some more election rambling, and I said I wasn't going to. So I think I am done. My prediction being that Washington demonstrates that it's rigged and is also Bernie's absolute last stand. At that point, there won't really be any point in keeping up with it anymore. So, your different branches of fascism. Pick your poison. I'm not interested. Hard to be able to tell for sure, but it does look like what I thought was synth is mostly guitar effects. It's in that middle point. Or it might be backing tapes, it's hard to tell. It looks like he's bowing it though. So, I'm thinking it's worth going to. I may be surprised pleasantly or not, but we'll find out. So I'm just about to start wiping down my last profile, or my last series of posts in my vlogging profile, comments on other people's videos, and I couldn't. Like, the censorship is just outrageous. I could not get the post through. What I was able to do was I was able to split it up into paragraphs, meaning as though the way that the filter is acting is, or one of the things that it's acting on is this refusal to allow me to present a coherent thought. I'm only allowed to present smart-ass comments. So I split it up into 8 parts, and I posted it here. I keep saying that this is my last comment. This will probably be my last comment because I am clearing this out. My other page is wiped down completely, and I think that the nature of the comment will make it clear. Part 1. I'm being horribly censored, and have been for months. So I'm going to have to post this in bits and pieces. I'm trying to get around some kind of spam filter, but it's not actually a spam filter. It's an ideas filter. Part 2. So I've been following the election from up in Canada, where I'm a fairly objective observer, and I happen to have a mathematical background. I'm the only person that I'm aware of that called for a split in Michigan, based simply on polling data. Part 3. I think that what you're seeing is just classic ballot box stuffing in the city districts. Cook County and downtown Boston were the ones with the biggest psychological outcomes, although how little patience with the pacifists, because it's the delegate count that matters. And whether Bernie carries a state with 55 or loses it with 45 doesn't matter a lot, even if it adds up. He's not behind because he lost Illinois. He's behind because he got beaten in the Southeast. And he has to find somewhere where he can win by similar margins to balance it out. But those were the ones with the biggest psychological outcomes. That's Chicago and Boston to this point. But I think we've also seen it in Cleveland, Detroit, Atlanta, and now Phoenix. Part 4. The way this works is that she floods the early voting results with mail-in and absentee ballots. This tactic was very clear in both Ohio and Arizona, as well as Illinois and Missouri, where the initial results came in with a up around 75-25. She's basically giving herself a huge head start, 50,000 plus votes. Then when the actual votes come in, they have to make up the difference. And you can add in the voter suppression tactics on top of this. Part 5. What that means is that there really isn't a conspiracy with the exit polls. You claim the data is staying put all night. That actually isn't the case, from what I've seen. Rather, the margins get closer and closer all night. And that is actually a classic sign of data rigging. When you start off with a big lead and it gets, it willows down. Part 6. In fact, the reason the networks are calling it so early is that they would expect, if the votes are fair, that the early voting would be roughly the same as the late voting. If the networks were looking for it, they would notice that the results that they're seeing are very suspicious. They shouldn't be watching the tallies narrow predictably over and over. An election where Clinton gets 75% with early voters and 40% with day of voters is just about the most obvious fraud you could contemplate. But that is in fact what we're seeing in state after state. Part 7. But you have to understand that Clinton can't do this by herself. This is a full party effort. And what it means is that the party had already chosen its candidate before the voting started. And the outcome was never in doubt. The party is just expecting Sanders to act as bait. That's all this process was ever about. Sanders will not be the Democratic nominee. And the idea that he ever would be was never seriously on the table. Part 8. The thing is that Sanders has to know this. What you're going to find out in the next few weeks is whether he's been playing along the whole time, was just doing outreach for Hillary, or whether this was a plan from the start to use the Democratic primary as a launching pad for a run as an independent. Part 9. For right now, she's no doubt going to pull the same trick in Seattle. He should get something like 75% in Washington, but it will probably roughly split due to early voting mail-ins. And the race will be officially done. You'll have to see what he does next. End transmission. This is an article where, it's coming from a very, very pro-Cruz, pro-establishment source here, where it's arguing, Trump can't even win Utah. See, but this goes back to the reconfiguration that I'm talking about. I would agree that if it's Trump versus Clinton, I think Utah might actually vote for a third candidate. To be frank with you, they might vote for Sanders, but Trump versus Clinton is like, I pointed out a few times that you're looking at like a ridiculously low turnout, like overall. Like a state like Utah would not see anything they want in either of those candidates, Trump versus Clinton. And yeah, Trump could very well lose Utah. But there's a lot of other states that you would not consider in play. A lot of people are throwing New York around. I don't think really New York is in play. New York doesn't have the base of workers that have been really decimated by the economic policies of the last 30 years. States that do would be states like Michigan, or perhaps Illinois. Those are states. I don't think Trump could swing New York. I do think he could swing Illinois. I think he would dominate in the South. I mean, those areas that are going to vote Republican anyways. But I think he could win pretty big in those kinds of middle of the road states like Virginia and North Carolina. I think Hillary would probably win Florida, but Trump would carry Ohio in a landslide. So that's kind of the calculus you're looking at. Um, Hillary's a better Christian, and if push comes to shove, Hillary will get the right-wing Christian vote that Trump can't. But Hillary's a horrible elitist who offers nothing to the working class. And Trump will clean up with those voters. It doesn't really matter what their skin color is. It matters where they end up in the economic space. The logic that suggested that Sanders should clean up in the Rust Belt was frustrated by the existence of Trump. When you give these people an option to choose to vote for their economic well-being based on liberal or conservative social values, we see once again, and in fact there's a very long history of this, that workers choose conservative social values, not liberal social values. And if they're seen as broadly equivalent on these economic issues, they will vote for, the anti-gay candidate or the anti-woman candidate or the anti-immigrant candidate. Workers will vote for that candidate every single time, so long as their own economic well-being is taken care of. I'm an anarchist, right? So I'm not your traditional Marxist leftist. I am rather explicit in not putting my hopes for revolutionary potential in the working class. I'm more a lumpen proletariat, unemployed student type. But nonetheless, those are pretty strong words for a leftist. I'm also a realist, and that is the reality of it. So, it may seem strange for me to be, suggesting ways for the Republicans to win. I really think you're underestimating just how opposed progressive forces are to Hillary Clinton, and just how willing they are to look outside the rubric. If this is a realigning election or a reconfiguring election, all beds are off the table kind of thing. So, I think that the one-on-one polls are a little too early. National polls are misleading relative to the electoral collage. I always call it the electoral collage as though it's like I believe it's an electoral college. I think that's the correct thing to say. Yeah, just taking a national vote is misleading, right? It has happened more than once, in which case a president has lost the popular vote. And this early, you want to look more at voting histories, demographics, these sorts of things. And I don't think that Cruz comes out particularly well against Trump. One thing that is pretty clear from the polling, and that I think people might want to think about a little more carefully, is that Kasich. Kasich beats Clinton in every poll. And that makes sense, because they both have the same terrible economic policies. but Kasich is a little bit more to the right. That's America for you. All right, so the point being that it's you're throwing so many factors up in the air. It may seem outrageous to think that the Republicans could run somebody. They could lose Utah, but it sounds equally outrageous to think that the Republicans could run somebody that could challenge seriously in Illinois. Been a long time. I guess I think it was Reagan was the last person that challenged in Illinois. They could, coalesce the Rust Belt into a stable Republican voting bloc, perhaps at the expense of the religious right, but they may be becoming a liability anyways. And that is the truth of the situation. Nobody is going to win an election in the United States by trying to build itself on top of the religious right for a long time. The demographics don't make sense, especially not with young people. That's a phenomenon that was cobbled together, and in the end, it is going to be short-lived. Young people are overwhelmingly secularist, overwhelmingly progressive on the issues that the older religious people are concerned with, and it's a one-way ticket to losing. Cruz is probably the last of his kind. The truth is that Republicans in the future are probably going to sound a lot more like Donald Trump. And it's the Democrats that puts into a crisis point. If Trump is able, as I think he will be able to, build a very strong coalition amongst what are now very badly unemployed and very badly undereducated former workers in the Rust Belt that need some help and may make some disappointing ballot decisions this year and perhaps 4 years from now as well. So, like I say, this is a very skewed source, but I'm sure you'll see that these ideas floating around. The logic is faulty. It's a long ways out, and I know that the polls are kind of, they've got margins of error in them, but they are still nonetheless leading. That Trump is the least electable candidate. I don't think that'll work out. I think in the long run it's going to be Cruz that's the least electable. I think the polls right now show that Kasich is doing well either way. I think that there's some ulterior motives there. I think that Kasich would lose to Sanders, but that has to do with the economics. When you put Kasich and Clinton against each other, because their economic policies are so similar, it's just a question of who's further right. And in the United States, at the moment, for at least this election cycle, you're still looking at moderate conservatism being the winning ticket. It has been for 35 years, and it's probably going to be for another 5 or 10. The boomers ain't dead yet. So, it depends. If it's Clinton, um, I think Kasich beats Clinton. I think Trump can beat Clinton. I don't think Cruz can beat Clinton. If it's Sanders, I think that Sanders can beat Kasich. I think that Sanders can beat Cruz. I think that when you put Sanders against Trump, it's a little more difficult for the same reason that Kasich matches up well against Clinton. When you ask a worker, well, it's the reason that um, Trump is pulling people um, more than Bernie is, right? They're voting for, voting in the same place. They got a choice. They can vote for Sanders or Trump, and it's repeatedly the case that more people are voting for Trump, and that's going to likely transfer over, whatever, despite what the polls say right now. So, I know that seems outrageous, but yeah. So, like I say, it sounds crazy to think that the Republicans could elect somebody that won't win in Utah, but there's other places, and it kind of balances it. It's about 8 o'clock, which means it's the longest day. I'm gonna sneak a bagel in before I go to bed. I didn't get a start on the election stuff, but I did clean up some loose shit that I had hanging around from the blog profile. So that was something that I had in the list. I wasn't even gonna mention it, kind of thing. It was just gonna happen, but other things built up on top of themselves today to get me there. So I'm gonna get a start on that. Well, I might not if I'm heading to the show tomorrow, but I need to kind of try to get some parameters on what I'm doing here so I can move forward. I've got a long weekend coming up. It's some Christian holiday that I don't particularly care about, but I'm going to give myself till the end of Monday to finish the catch up. So I'm not going to be doing any editing, anything like that. I'm not going to. Wait, are they voting on Easter in the States? Easter Saturday. That should help Bernie, right? You'd think. Weird day. You can't help Hillary anyways. Strange, very strange. Okay. Well, I mean, it's just, I mean, I just stated I don't care. I suspect there's a large percentage of the Democratic Party that doesn't care. But why would you? I mean, it's a major holiday for Christians. It's like kind of the whole point, right? Kind of a crazy schedule. I guess it's the states that make that decision, right? I guess. I mean, it makes sense. Everybody's got the day off, right? Or everybody should have the day off. It's that holiday. I guess cultural. I guess. Even here in Ontario, which is pretty secular, that would be, I think, considered. Well, I think it would just be considered disrespectful. And that's kind of what I'm kind of, It's of all the days you could pick, you gotta pick the most important day in the Christian calendar. Um, and I think in a real sense, the rest of that day is kind of like the most important part of Christianity, right? Um, I don't think that there can be anything but something. Well, there I go again with the cognitive dissonance, right? Um, trying to pretend as though it's a fair election, right? So yeah, I have to give myself to the end of the weekend at the latest, kind of thing, to get this shit dealt with. Um, I mean, if I wake up on Tuesday morning and there's like 2 things left to do, but um, I'm getting near the end of the month, and it's a lot later than I wanted it to be regarding this. Like I say, when you put everything together, it's like I quit smoking. Um, I lost this season. It's not the end of the world, right? But I want to be wrapping it up, kind of thing. So this is the last major archiving aspect. A couple of smaller things I need to do, but this is the last major thing. So doesn't look like. Well, I'm not going to get started tonight. We'll see what happens when I wake up tomorrow, but I mean it's not likely before I hit the show. I more wanted to just stay up a little bit later to ensure that I didn't fall asleep before the show hit. So um, if I'm in bed a little after 9, then even 6 o'clock. I might try to keep myself awake a little bit. It's just I expect to get back, but if I don't, it's gonna be a long night, sort of thing. In fact, I should check the bus schedules. I'm still not sure about the weather. I mean, if it turns out the bus is bad because of the holiday and etc. Right? I'm gonna check the weather before I go. It's kind of a big deal. But right now, I'm going to get something to eat and fall asleep.